Jennie Taylor was married to the late Major Brent Taylor, who died in Afghanistan serving our country. Jennie has started a foundation in his name to try and help restore patriotism and a sense of spirit to the United States. All in his, not only all in his name, but more importantly, in the spirit of both the warrior and the history professor that Jennie is. Jennie has had a master's in education. She's extremely concerned about teaching civics in the United States. It's a great talk. Now hit that subscribe button and we'll get on with our show with the Optimistic American, and you can hear Jennie Taylor talk about the great service that she and her late husband have given to the United States. Well, Jennie, welcome to the Optimistic American. I can't tell you how excited we are to have you on.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right. So we're going to talk about your foundation. Of course, the foundation is named after your late husband. But if I can, let me start with just asking you about how you met and your early lives together.
Oh, my goodness. We met on a blind date, which is usually just a train wreck. And it was a terrible blind date. And then we just ended up reconnecting. We had a lot of mutual friends in college. So these friends had thought we'd be a perfect match. The date itself didn't go well, but I think a week or two later, we ended up gathered with some similar friends and just really got to talking. And from there on out, it was just, they say love at first sight. I don't know that it was love at first sight, but there was a connection. And a lot of that connection really was a devotion to this country, an appreciation for the rights that we have here, and a sense of duty that we each felt like, oh, we have it so well here. We've been given so many blessings and opportunities. We need to do something meaningful with our lives. So we were young, we were ambitious. I think we were both 23, both in college. We had each served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, separate countries at separate times. But we ended up spending most of our dating time talking about military service for him. It was in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. We met at the very beginning of 2003. So we're only about a year into that whole global war on terrorism environment. And he was meeting with recruiters. We were going back and forth with what will our life look like. And of course, when you're young and in love, you think you know everything that life will look like. So we just planned a beautiful life together. We got engaged in June, the very same month he enlisted in the Army. We got married in September, and the following January, he left to boot camp and initial training. So we spent the first year of our marriage separated by military service. And then on and off again throughout our years together, we were separated by that same military service. But it was always a shared commitment. My hat is really off to people who maybe meet a member of the military and then decide to jump into that relationship. When I met Brent, he was still deciding. We decided together. And so really, it's the only life I've ever known. I've only ever known life married to a soldier. And beautiful young years together. We both knew we wanted a family. We both wanted a big family. And we were just hitting the ground running. And again, just that youth and energy and ambition of we're going to do something important with our lives. And we started right with him in the Army. Right, a couple of years later, we had our first child. And we were just ready to take life head on. We really were.
You had 7 children, as I understand.
We ended up with 7, yes. And that is exhausting just to say it. So I'll let everyone think about that. I'm like, it takes 2 hands. It takes 2 hands to have that many fingers. It's a lot of kids.
Yeah, well,
but yeah, Brent
beautiful.
came from a family of 8. I came from a family of 4. And Brent would joke, he loved this country so much, and he felt such a duty and such an opportunity to be an American citizen and to have this heritage. And he would joke with me that if we didn't have these children, maybe they'd get their unborn spirit would be born in some other part of the world where they wouldn't know freedom and democracy and hope and opportunity. How can you say no to that? I can't let that unborn baby not have the life and the hope and the American dream we had. So he would always say they'd get stuck in Bangladesh or somewhere else. So we brought him here. We brought him here on purpose. We brought him to this beautiful country where hope and freedom and hard work and just the principles on which this country is founded were theirs from the beginning.
Yeah, my mom and dad had 9 children, so I identify with you on that. It was I was the
Oh, that's
oldest,
a
so
lot of
it
kids.
was my job to keep order,
Oh,
and if you didn't have order, I
yeah,
was in trouble, which I never really quite figured out, but
yeah.
nonetheless,
That is how it works. Keep them all in line.
yep.
Well, bless you for being the firstborn. I'm not sure my firstborn loves being from a large family yet. I think maybe she'll grow up and like having adult siblings, but right now she just kind of rolls her eyes at me that there's so many in the family.
You know, my dad told me all the time growing up, he used to say, the greatest blessing I'm going to give you are brothers and sisters. He said, you may not know it yet, but you
Oh,
will one day. And oh
yeah,
my
you might need to
goodness, has
grow
that been
into that.
true?
So
Yeah,
true.
it's the greatest
Yeah,
blessing ever.
same for me.
All right, so he also went on to become mayor, mayor of Ogden, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep,
All
yep,
right.
mayor of North Ogden City. It's a community about 45 minutes north of Salt Lake City in Utah.
All right, so I was mayor of the city of Phoenix. So you got to tell me the story. How does he become mayor?
Oh, okay, well, Phoenix is a bigger city than North Ogden. I promise you that. So, again, he always felt a sense of duty to community and country. He enlisted in the Army first and went the enlisted route. After a time, he commissioned and became an officer. He was born a leader. He was always the kid in junior high and high school, always the kid at home that you joke about being in charge of your siblings' behavior. He would be the one that would somehow make sure everyone got their chores done, including his chores, even if he maybe didn't do them. He just had the leadership skill to kind of rally the troops. So he had served two deployments to Iraq early in our marriage. At the time, we had 2 children, and I was expecting our third. He was in a Master of Public Administration program at the University of Utah. It was an evening program where he went to class a couple nights a week. He came home one of the nights after class. It had to be almost, if not after 10 p.m. I'm exhausted. I'm a million months pregnant. I have 2 little toddlers. And he said, I think I need to run for city council. And I just looked at him like he was crazy. I thought, you've been gone 2 years. You were home a year before that and gone the year before that. And we've been married about 5 years and never seen each other. We've got these 2 little babies and one on the way, and he's in school. And I feel like I'm as exhausted as I could be. You think you need to run for city council? And I kid you not, what put it on his radar was back in those days, you used to get a paper utility bill from your city. A lot of things I know are virtual now or electronic. In the paper bill was a paper newsletter. And in the newsletter was an announcement that there were 2 vacancies on the council coming up. The election was coming. And he was always very politically active. He was involved with political groups in college. He had always been in student leadership in high school. He was born for politics and leadership, but it really was the note in the mail.
I'll be darned.
So he ran for city council in 2009. Like I said, he made the decision right before our third child was born, and I remember campaigning, canvassing neighborhoods with little brochures with my 2 little boys in a double stroller and my 3-year-old on a scooter. We'd go door to door to door. Hi, vote for my dad. Vote for my dad. And then after 4 years there, he put his hat in the ring to run for mayor, and he did a great job. He really, like I said, he was born a leader, but he was really gifted in bringing people together. And I don't know how Phoenix is. Like I said, I know Phoenix population size is definitely larger than North Ogden, but local politics is sometimes the hardest level of politics because it's so close. You live where you
Oh yeah.
work, where you serve, where you're elected. You're not removed back in DC or down in the governor's mansion. You're like at home. And small town politics can be small town politics. I mean, it's got a reputation for a reason. And he could really just bring disagreeing minds together and not necessarily get them all to see things the same way, but to respect the fact that there could be another way to see it. And, you could be in somebody that had a heated, debated disagreement and shake hands at the end of the day.
That's a key factor, what you're talking about being heard. I remember reading back during the time that I was mayor, a set of principles, and one of the principles was the idea that you should seek to hear before being heard, or seek to
Yeah,
and
understand.
yeah, and the key is I found that if I would just say to people, okay, so help me understand, I think this is what you just said, and repeat back to them what it was that they had said, then it was amazing how they would begin to feel heard, and it changed things. Now,
Yeah.
at the same time, at times it was really tough on my spouse, my wife at the time, because
Hmm.
she oftentimes would have to face the problem. She'd have to listen to
Right.
people complaining about what had happened, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't vote.
Right.
Did you
So
struggle with
hard.
that at all? How did you work your
Yes.
way through that?
Yes, and I also would struggle with the fact that people will say mean and awful, terrible things that aren't
Oh boy.
necessarily always true.
Hmm.
Not everybody speaks truth, and there would be things. Let's say there was a project or a program at the city that Brent and his team were working on, and I would hear misunderstandings about it, or I would hear the complaints about it, and I would get so frustrated for the same reason as your wife, where I would say, well, if you only knew, if you actually had the information, if you did the research, if you were inside the meetings where these conversations were had, you would see there's more to it. A lot of times as residents or citizens of a community, we get just kind of the tip of the iceberg, and we think we know everything. And sometimes people are mean and disrespectful, and I did not have the same thick skin that he had. And so my biggest thing was I had to learn not to take everything personally. And I'll admit that that's lasted even after his time in public office. He was very good at being professional and bringing people together. I just say, you can't let him say those things, or that's not true, or honey, you need to prove him wrong. Of course, my way was not a very helpful way. Mine was more emotional, but it is frustrating. I'm grateful for the different leaders we have in different levels of government and other civic leadership, and to their families, because it takes a toll. I mentioned my baby was literally a newborn when his father got into public office. And the rest of that was the third. My other four children were born to a political father. They were all born into a father who was already a soldier. And we've got wonderful heroes in our country that have done amazing things, but I've really come to appreciate the loved ones behind those heroes. And most of them, we don't know their names. We don't know much about them, but the husbands or the wives, the children, the siblings, the parents, it community service is a family affair, and it can take a
Absolutely.
toll on a family. And I'm grateful for the small things that some people would, maybe acknowledge that sacrifice, or say, hey, you're doing a great job, or your husband sure is a good mayor. And I would love to hear nice things like that, because so often we are just such a complaining, grumbly people. And Americans, we want freedom of speech, and usually we want to be angry with our freedom of speech. So it was hard. It was hard, but very rewarding, because I could see, even when I had to maybe bite my tongue and not say everything I wished I could say, I could see the impact he was having. I could see the difference his leadership was making. And I just had to accept that maybe not everybody would know that full truth. And I just have to trust that truth is truth and good is good. And I mean, some people don't even want to know the truth. They seem to like the contention, and they seem to like the disagreement. So, but yeah, it's hard. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work. It takes a lot of family contribution, and again, the kids. You and your wife, you've got your family, my kids, other children of leaders. That it's a family affair when you are willing to put yourself in a public position, whether that public position is elected office or otherwise. You kind of become a moving target, and you give up a lot of privacy that I think a lot of other families get to enjoy, that my kids have never known.
I recall my wife called me one day and she said, there are people picketing in front of our house, and they're upset because they think that you are a satanic worshiper. And I'm like,
Oh,
what? A satanic? How does that happen?
like, where
Well,
did that come from?
as it turns out, there was art that was done on this roadway. And the artwork had picked up what had happened in the local community. There was a hospital there, so they had one piece of art that was a nurse and a doctor, and then
Okay.
there was a senior community there, so there was an older woman who was walking with a cane. But there was a high school called Sunny Slope High School, which I actually went to, and their mascot was a Viking. So they did a Viking with a horn. Well, they thought that it was a devil. So we had 1,000 people
Oh,
that came out
so
mad
they
at me,
misread
thinking,
that.
yeah,
Isn't that
and
funny how quickly people will jump to a conclusion?
oh,
And then all of a sudden it's the Salem witch trials. My goodness.
yep. And of course, I figured it out, so I just went out and met with the group and said, no, "That's not what this is.
Let me
Let me tell you what
explain.
this is," and it
Did
calmed
they
them down.
receive the explanation well? Were they
They were
open to
fine. You know,
your, okay, good.
you have people that are mad at you no matter what, and sometimes it's
Sure.
instigated by people who want people to be mad at
Who
you.
want to
But
be mad.
yep.
Exactly.
But the hard part for my spouse was she didn't know all that. She couldn't go outside and
Yeah.
talk to them. All she knows there's people
Yeah.
out there in the front of the house that have these
Yeah.
signs that are saying that
saying
I'm a
saying
satanic worshiper. So,
saying untrue things about the person she loves the most. That's hard. That's
yep.
hard. Yeah. Oh, that's
All
tough.
right. So I don't know if you feel comfortable, but do you feel comfortable telling us about what happened
Yeah.
on the fateful mission for your husband?
Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity. So I mentioned Brent served in Iraq twice. He then got on the city council for 4 years. In the middle of his first term on city council, he actually deployed to Afghanistan with the National Guard. So he took a leave of absence, came back. Then he ran for mayor. And he was almost all the way through a full 4 year term as mayor when another deployment came up. And as a member of the National Guard, the older he got, the less likely I think any of us thought a combat deployment would be. I mean, for one, looking back to 2001, I don't think any of us thought we'd still be fighting Afghanistan 20 years later. For another, we're getting old. We're like in our late 30s. We've got all these kids. He's a mayor. He was still a soldier on the side as a National Guardsman, but word came up that there was a certain unit. It actually ended up being a Ranger battalion out of Georgia that needed an officer to fill a position that was very similar to what Brent had done on a prior deployment. And it wasn't a Utah group. It wasn't his own unit that required him to deploy. It was kind of a, hey, we need anybody. Is anybody willing? And he said, I'm willing. I've actually done that before. I'd love the chance to do it again, and I can serve. So in the very beginning of 2018, he deployed for the fourth combat deployment. We had 7 kids, as you mentioned. The baby was 2 months old the day he got on a plane, and our oldest daughter was 12. So I had a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And everything possible went wrong the year he was deployed. Our house flooded. We didn't have any running water. We had to get into temporary shelter situation. It just felt like one thing after another was just kicking me down. And it was so hard. I would joke, but not really joking, that I was the one fighting a war. It was terrible. And then toward the end of that year, as fall came, we kind of started to get the pieces put back together back home. He was doing great things, loving the mission he was on, loving the Afghans he was serving with, connecting with NATO allies, really just thriving as a soldier. And one of the ways he really was able to build the relationships with both the Afghans and his NATO partners was through a weekly hike. So in Afghanistan, Saturday was kind of their day off, and anybody that didn't have any obligations, they'd go on a ruck march. They'd put all their body armor on. They'd go running and hiking, and real good physical fitness, but also team building exercise. And on the morning of Saturday, November 3rd, he and a bunch of his Afghan men were on this hike that they did on a fairly routine basis, when it turns out one of the men he was training had gone rogue. He had been infiltrated with terroristic ideals, and he had begun to see Brent as an American officer who was the enemy. And he shot and killed him on that ruck march. And so it was early as Saturday morning and close range. Everybody had their guard down. It was a team building exercise. And fortunately, nobody else was killed that day. There was one other American soldier there with my husband who was grazed by a second bullet, but fortunately it didn't kill him. And he was mildly wounded, but okay. And that was the beginning of just, a completely unexpected turn of events for me and my kids. I mentioned that deployment was really hard. We'd done 3 deployments before. I'd been married to a soldier for 15 years. I'd given birth before, but 2018 was a really hard year. And here we are in November. The year's almost over, where I can just try to put it behind me. And I get a knock on the door from 2 Army officers in full dress uniform to let me know Brent's not coming home ever. And it was absolutely, without a doubt, the biggest shock in anything in my life. You would think after 15 years and on the 4th deployment with 7 kids, we would have had maybe some more realistic what if conversations. But from early on, even when we were dating, we were both just so committed to finding this path in life of serving our God and serving our country. And he felt so strongly about serving in the military. It wasn't, hey, I have no other options. It wasn't, hey, I'm desperate for the money because I have no other employment. And it wasn't even, hey, I'm bored, I need something to do. He really felt compelled to be there. And when word of that deployment need came up, he didn't say, oh, twist my arm, I'll do it. He said, let me go. I can do that. I can fill that void. I can help. And so there's a certain peace of mind that has come to me, and I hope to our family, that he died doing what he loved. He really, as much as we were drowning that entire deployment, he was thriving. He was healthier than he's ever been. I think he was building beautiful relationships with international friends. He was really leading well, and it just went a very unexpected way. So at the very end of 2018, I became a widow.
What was it like for the first few months?
Awful. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. And I'm sure there are people listening who've lost a loved one, whether expectedly or unexpectedly. It's just awful. A fog. Um, I mentioned the age of the kids when Brent deployed, but at the time he died, our oldest had just turned 13, and my youngest baby's first birthday was 2 days after the funeral. So my hands were full. I mean, one of the first things I thought is, I don't have 7 arms. Like, forget the emotional toll of this. I can't physically raise 7 kids by myself. And guess what, Paul? I'm unemployed. I've been a stay-at-home mom and wife and a homemaker for 15 years. The last time I had a paid job, I was a high school teacher with 2 years fresh out of college. Sorry, there goes my dog. I was a high school teacher. That teachers in Utah are not known for being paid exorbitant amounts of money, but I wasn't even doing that at the time. And so there's the panic of, how do I pay the bills? There's the fear of, how do I raise children in this crazy world with no partner? And honestly, my dad died when I was a child. I lost my father to suicide when I was 10. And I don't think I would ever wish a fatherless childhood on anyone. And so I had a lot of emotion to deal with, just of all of the unfortunate circumstances. I never would have wanted my kids to face that. In fact, I was very particular with who I married. I wanted someone who could be a loving, devoted father. I wanted someone who could be a provider, so I could be home and have my primary responsibility in those early years be to take care of our children. And that's who I married. Like, that's what I picked. That's what I found. It seems so perfect. It seems so picture perfect. And the first probably 6 months to a year, we were just in shock. We went to a lot of ceremonies. There were a lot of wonderful people that wanted to honor Brent and our country and his service and just military service in general. Um, I remember half the time, I'm not sure who had the kids, my mom, the neighbors. I felt like the whole world was feeding us and cleaning the house. I just couldn't do what I used to do. I mean, I remember thinking, I used to make dinner every day. I'm not sure I remember how to make dinner. I don't remember. The littlest things were so overwhelming. The finances were so overwhelming. And then the other thing that I really was surprised by was just how physically exhausting grieving was. It felt like my whole body was exhausted. It felt like I'd been running marathons day after day after day, and all I was doing was feeling emotion. I hadn't done any physical exertion. And it was tough on the kids. It was very public. You've got this father of 7 from a small town in Utah who's mayor, and all of a sudden he's killed in action. The media was all over everywhere we went. The kids, like I mentioned, my kids had never really had a lot of privacy. We'd always been kind of a public figure, at least in our small community here, being the children of the mayor. People knew who they were. I mean, for one thing, there's not a lot of families with 7 kids around. And I've got bright red hair, so it's kind of easy to distinguish us. And we'd be at the grocery store and people would know who we are. And I think for the kids, it was a massive invasion of privacy. And for me, it was just shock. Maybe after the first year or so, we started to kind of settle in. And then right after we hit that 1 year mark, the COVID pandemic hit. And it was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. The rug just got pulled out from under us. Everything familiar or we thought reliable was just completely pulled out. Kids couldn't go to school. Friends and family could no longer come over and help or babysit or help me keep up on housework or anything. And so it was, I would honestly say the first 3 years were really, really hard. The first year was just an emotional train wreck. The second year ran into that COVID pandemic of just the whole world being a mess, literally worldwide. And then it took us into 21, 22 to where we could finally say, okay, do we dare? Can we catch our breath? Are we doing okay? And now somehow it's 2024. I don't know how so much time has gone by. And I feel like, okay, maybe we, knock on wood, maybe we can do this. Maybe we're going to be okay. And fortunately, we did have a lot of love and support to get us here.
The people who were watching, I know that grief can be just a huge cloud of darkness. When did you start to see the first rays of light, and what did you do to be able to get there? Were you able to get
Oh,
treatment or help, or did it
yeah.
come from
So
spiritual training? What was it that
all
helped you
all of the
finally break
above.
back through?
All of the above. I think for me, the light for sure came from my personal faith. I believe in a God who loves us and accompanies us. And I remember kind of having this wrestle in my mind of, I thought we'd been doing God's will our whole lives. He's been guiding us as service to our country is a very faith. It takes a lot of faith to do that, to be willing to sacrifice and die for someone else. And I remember some really candid conversations in my heart and mind with my God and my personal faith. But I'll tell you it early on, even in the darkness and the fog, I remember thinking, do I really believe what I believe in terms of my personal faith? And it was a gut check. Do I believe this? Because if I believe this, if I believe what I believe, then I believe we're going to be okay. And if I believe what I believe about America and this beautiful country and the freedoms and responsibilities we have as citizens, if I really, really believe that, then I guess I have to admit I believe some things are worth dying for. And if I really believe, and so a lot of those thoughts kind of propelled me forward, even in the darkness and the fog. But I think one of the most therapeutic things for me began with some of those ceremonies I mentioned. People would invite us. We're invited to the governor's going to honor the military people from Utah that passed away last year, or the Red Cross wants to say thank you and hold an honorary blood drive, or the university where he had attended school wanted to add his name to the fallen military alumni walls, things like that. And we'd be at those events, which were beautiful, but also heavy and hard to attend. And something started happening. They would say, thank you to the Taylor family. We're so sorry for your loss. We want to honor you and your husband. And then they would say, Mrs. Taylor, would you like to say anything? And I hadn't prepared to say anything, and I didn't really have remarks or what. And I remember even in my very early vulnerability thinking, I know they're going to talk about my family. I'd rather be part of the conversation than just an onlooker. So I began to speak. And I began to share those thoughts of, what do I believe about America? What do I believe about sacrifice and freedom? What do I believe about my husband's devotion to this country and to his creator? And as I was able to speak those words, it basically became my therapy. I was able to hear myself say things that I knew were true. There were things I believed that made me love Brent Taylor as a young 20-something newlywed bride. But his death was kind of that gut check. Do you really believe this? Because we'll say things like freedom isn't free and land of the free and home of the brave. And when something really goes wrong, that's a chance for a lot of us. We use the phrase sink or swim. Do you really believe your faith? Do you believe your purpose in life? Do you really believe in the freedoms and principles on which this country was founded? And I'm proud to say yes. And that's probably the deepest, most motivating lesson I learned in that darkness and in that fog, was that I actually really believe it. It wasn't just on the surface, and it wasn't just what I said at church or what I thought I read in the Bible. It really was ingrained in who I am. I fully believe it was ingrained in who Brent is and was as a person and as a husband and father and soldier. And so for me, the light came in being able to step back a little bit and realize that there was a purpose to the pain and the loss. Viktor Frankl, if you read Man's Search for Meaning, he's in a concentration camp and he speaks of the importance of finding purpose. Now, I don't know that God killed my husband so I could learn these great lessons. But I think when my husband was killed, God let me learn a lot of lessons. And so that darkness and that fog, that desperation for light, have helped me find the light I always believed in and I always thought I knew because it was easy to say, because it was almost cliche. But I know it. I know some things are worth dying for. And I know family and freedom are two of those. And I know Brent would agree. I know I'm sure he wishes he were still here to help me raise these kids and enjoy moments with them. But I know if he could speak from wherever he is as a deceased soldier, I know he would say he's honored to have given his life for this country that gave him so much, that will continue to give our children and our unborn grandchildren and great-grandchildren the opportunity to live and to dream and to work and achieve those dreams. So for me, the light for sure came in my faith in God. It came in my faith in this country. And it came in that shared sense of duty that Brent and I both had from the moment we met after the first terrible blind date, that we have something special here in this country. And the real question is, do we really believe it? Because if we really believe it, we got to be willing to pitch in for it. Do we only believe it if somebody else will pay? Freedom's not free. Do I only like it if it's somebody else footing the bill? Or do I really believe freedom is so precious and so high a price that I'm willing to help pay it, because I refuse to live in a world where freedom is not paid for? So that's been what's really brought me through.
From my perspective, Brent does have a voice. I'm listening to him right now, for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Okay,
that means a lot to
so
me.
you decide to go start this foundation. The foundation, first, if you would tell us what the idea was,
Yeah.
but also, how do you even know where to start such a thing? How do you even begin such a thing?
It's so funny. I think sometimes in life, some of the things we're the most successful at are the things we're just totally clueless at. Because if we actually knew how much work would be required in certain things, maybe we wouldn't be brave enough to jump in, right? Mayor, whatever it is you've done. So actually what happened was right after Brent died, at the time of his death, he was a doctoral student at the University of Utah. He had finished his MPA and begun a doctoral program. He was almost done. And in fact, he was ready to finish the doctoral program before this deployment, so he had to push pause. Some of his classmates started a scholarship fund in his memory. And as soon as I learned about that, I decided I wanted to help raise the money and have that be, I think it was maybe $2,500. And I had a lofty goal. I'm like, we're going to get it to $100,000, which, remember, I'm an unemployed widowed mother of 7. Like, I don't have $100,000. And so I was talking to some friends, and we decided to turn Brent's birthday, the first birthday after his passing, into a scholarship fundraiser. And he would have turned 40. So he died at 39. And his birthday is the following summer. His birthday is 2 days after the 4th of July, the perfect American story. And so we got people together and we said, hey, we want to raise some money for actually 2 scholarships. One at the U, where he was a doctoral student, but also one at Brigham Young University, where he had done his bachelor's. We had a picnic at the park, and we set a goal to raise $40,000 for his 40th birthday. And I had a friend who was a businesswoman. She knew far more about the business world than I did, and far more about working with lots of money than I did. And she said, hey, Jennie, if you can form a nonprofit organization, people will donate more money to this fundraiser. I'm like, okay. I mean, really, that's about as much thought as went into it. So it started as a birthday scholarship fundraiser. This same businesswoman friend of mine helped me do all the paperwork and working with the IRS and the state of Utah to get the nonprofit in place, to get the recognition status as a 501c3 from the IRS. And we raised the $40,000 for the birthday party. Before we finished, over the next several months, we raised $160,000 for those scholarship endowments. We put $100,000 at the University of Utah. Technically, Brent had done his doctorate and master's there. And then we put $60,000 at Brigham Young University. And that's really how it started. And it just grew from there. Not long after Brent died was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And as that rolled around, I found myself feeling compelled to do something. I mentioned I was a teacher. I was a history teacher. And I just feel this strong desire and need to help educate the rising generation as to what freedom is and what it costs and what it looks like. And so got together with a few friends and said, hey, what if we hosted some kind of commemorative event for 9/11. And I'm proud to say we did it that year in September 2021. We've done it each year since. We'll do it again this year. We bring in thousands of school children to a giant museum exhibit. We involve local police officers, firefighters, medical and military professionals. We walk them through an audiovisual timeline of events. We help them interact with these service providers and help them see that firefighters weren't only important on 9/11. We still need them today. Soldiers aren't only important in a combat zone. We still need them today, police officers, etc. And so it's kind of grown from there. We've done a lot in the military support space and a lot in the military family support space. So what we started with was a scholarship fundraiser. And I feel like what we've stumbled upon is open doors that we've had the courage to walk through. And I use the metaphor of a door because of the phrase, I'm sure you've heard it, when God closes a door, he opens a window. I love this sentiment, but I disagree with it a little bit because I don't think God's ever the one shutting the doors. In my life, I found God's the one opening doors. I might find a dead end, but I'm not sure God gave me the dead end. I think God says, hey, come this way. There's a beautiful open door. So he's opened doors for us to influence high school and junior high children. He's opened the door for us to have these scholarship opportunities. I find myself in a lot of military connected conversations here in my own state, supporting family members at Christmas, military family members at Christmas time. And we've just had a great, unexpected series of events to where we've adopted the mission statement that we seek to ignite patriotism by giving people meaningful opportunities to train, honor, and engage. We want to train leaders. We want to honor military members and their family. And we want to engage as fellow citizens because a lot of that fell apart in COVID. Man, isolation was tough on the human race. And now it's almost like we're still pseudo isolated. We live in this virtual world where people are still kind of disconnected or disgruntled with each other. So we like to bring people together and say, hey, you know how you're going to get to know each other and get to like each other? You're going to work together. And you're going to maybe put up flags at a veteran's funeral. Or you're going to carry flags down Main Street when a soldier comes home. Sometimes we fly giant flags in canyons or on the sides of buildings for patriotic holidays and events. But it's been a beautiful opportunity to ignite patriotism in people while also building bridges between the civilian and military worlds, because a lot of times they're very separate. So do I know what I'm doing? No idea. Okay.
Walk me through those three principles again. Training. What's the idea to training? Training to me is essential. Training, that's what a scholarship is. I'm going to give you a scholarship. I don't want you to just go get a GPA. I want you to be trained. I want you to learn about leadership. I want you to learn how to work hard. We host our own leadership workshop series that we base off of a high school graduation speech Brent gave in 1997 at Chandler High down in Arizona. We've got this video where he teaches 5 principles to his graduating classmates, and they're brilliant and timeless. And so we've adapted it into a leadership workshop. So training might be we give you a scholarship to get some real in-class or, kind of professional academic level training. Training might be we're going to host a leadership workshop and say, here, come. Let's talk about leadership, sacrifice, service, how they play in together. And so training really is all of us at any age with a particular focus on the rising generation, because you and I at some point need the next generation to take over this country in a way that propels us to the future. And a lot of what our young people are exposed to today is not very patriotic. It's not service and sacrifice. There's a lot of selfishness and division. So we're trying to combat that. So training is not only for young people, but there's a special love in my teacher mama heart for young people. Honor. We want to honor the service member and their family. And it might be a military member because of course that hits close to home, but service member could be the cop, the firefighter. We live in a time, oh my goodness, look at the last couple of years and what public perception of police officers has been, or public perception of a lot of service industries. So a lot of those honor, we call them missions, involve American flags because we find something motivating but also healing about an American flag. If a service member passes away, whether young or old, veteran or active duty, it doesn't matter. We might show up with 150 flags at the funeral
We might fly a flag from the downtown bank. We might put it in a canyon and let people just see and feel the power of that healing red, white, and blue. But we'll also do things like I mentioned, the Christmas opportunity. We're going to honor a military or service member and their family by maybe helping provide some extra Christmas if means are tight. It's embarrassing, but we don't pay our police and military people a ton of money, in case you didn't know. So these past couple of years, with inflation being what it's been and food prices being what they are, we've had the opportunity to honor those who've served us by helping them in that way. And then we host a series of patriotic events. We'll take flags to parades and city festivals. We've got a veterans devotional where we bring in a speaker every year and maybe a concert to just really get those experiences of patriotism going. So that's honor. And then engage. We engage the entire community in our September 11th event, which also trains and honors, but it's mostly an engagement. We engage in service opportunities. We might honor a military member with flags at his funeral through a service project to do that. We engage people in meaningful ways to where they're connected on a human level. And usually a lot of engagement involves storytelling. So one of the things we do is I have a podcast. We like to share military members' stories. Or we might make some video clips around Veterans Day where we'll interview local veterans of all ages and generations. Say, hey, tell me why you decided to join the military. Tell me what it's been like. And then we have the opportunity to put those stories out there in a way that engages the civilian population. So we want to train, honor, and engage. We don't want patriotism to be passive. I don't want you to just think I love America and I'm going to sit on my couch and keep loving America. I want you to love America with your work, with your energy, with your talent. I want you to engage with those around you. I want you to find ways to go out of your way to say thank you or honor someone who's really put on the uniform of our country or your community in a way that says, hey, I'll die for you if you need me to. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement our military and service members make every day they get dressed for work. The least we can do is not just say thank you, but really show that thanks. So we stay busy. We love meeting new people. We love bringing generations together. I mentioned bridging the gap between civilian and service member, bringing veterans and just everyday people together. And it's just been a beautiful opportunity here in our Northern Utah community, but also across the state and beyond. So we're excited. We're only a few years in. We're excited to see where this takes us in years to come.
You know, it's such great work. And for me, you've just hit a couple of buttons that are important. The one you were talking about a moment ago, you're a history teacher, this idea of figuring out whether or not you really believe what it was that you thought you believed. You know, you can go all the way back to the Stoics, where the Stoics had, lots of conversations about what it meant to be an optimist or a pessimist. An optimist was someone who believed that there was an order in the world. They believed that things would work out because effectively there was an order that was bigger than them and that order would bring things back to some type of order. The pessimist believed there was only chaos in the world and that everything eventually through entropy would dissolve back into that chaotic state. Well, the faith that you have builds optimism. It builds hope that in fact order can restore itself, that life can restore itself. The other thing that you said that really that hit home with me, again, I mean, I hear the history professor in you all throughout what you're talking about here, but this idea of patriotism, I find a lot of people who wonder why. They're questioning everything on all sides. They're questioning who our country is, what role should we play, are we even a force for good? Do they even believe that we're a force for good? And what has failed us, I believe, is that we haven't really been teaching civics the way that we should be teaching it.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt in my mind. The United States today is the greatest superpower in the history of the planet. But we're not an empire. And that's really a curiosity all by itself because we didn't want to be an empire. We could have been. Yet, through the ideologies or through the philosophy of Americanism, the idea that we have this democratic capitalism. We've created a system, a rules-based order throughout the world that has done more to move human progress forward than any nation at any other time in the history of the planet. The reason to be patriotic is because we have these ideals, or as our founder said, we hold truth. Now, a lot of people believe there's this new theory that says, oh no, there are no universal truths. They don't exist. It's just perspective. What's your perspective versus my perspective? And it's all relative. So we should be looking at the jihadists the same way that we would look at us, or the Chinese atheists and their values the same way as we look at ours. Well, then, you know, especially if you're on the left, you might ask this question. So women having rights, is that a value that is better than a value that says women shouldn't have rights? Right? And if it is, then maybe, as it turns out, there are universal truths. Maybe, as it turns out, some values are better than other values. And that's what we're patriotic to. That's what the flag represents. It's so key. And over and over again throughout history, your husband was literally the first, as I understand it, the first politician to die in battle since the Civil War. You know, that's pretty amazing by itself. But what I look at when I hear this story is you just have to remember it's not just that soldier. There's a whole support group behind him, an entire family. There are people that care about them. There are people that worry about them. The reason we honor those soldiers, what you're trying to do in your foundation, building that bridge between civilians and people who serve, is because we have to recognize that they're such a part of our community and that they represent these ideals that are bigger than us, that make our sense of purpose worthy, not only in the world, but in history.
Yes. And if you don't find that there's, I love everything you just said. I could just go back to all of it. So civics, we've gotten such a focus in recent years on STEM, right? We want math and science and engineering. Those are beautiful, beautiful fields, but we've all but erased civics from our curriculum. Citizenship, like what does it mean to be a good member of a community? What does it mean to be a good human being? And I love what you've mentioned, and that sense of purpose, that sense that, again, something bigger than me, something more important than my own need or comfort. And that is what we've learned. And, you know, I really hope that's what my children, what they internalize. Obviously, they were so young. They were born into just so much of sheer chaos and things. And then the opportunity for them to step back and say, our family got to be part of something so much bigger. We're a part of history. We're a part of this big American experiment. And Brent used to say, you know, you mentioned this world superpower. Brent's doctoral studies were in international relations, and he was studying the concept of hegemony, to where the United States is the hegemon or the world superpower, whatever word you want to use for it. And some people say, no, that's not our job, and we should step out of the way. The problem is human nature is such that someone always rises into that position. So if we don't want to be a guiding light and a beacon of hope and freedom and democracy to the world, if we say we're going to step back and not take that position, someone else will fill it, and they might not fill it with as generous ideals and as human friendly. And you and I both know that it could be one of our adversaries that comes in and that communist approach or that socialist approach that just doesn't help the human nature advance. And so we've got to look at what is our role. I love that you mentioned we're not an empire. We've never gone, we don't go to Iraq and claim it as our own. We don't go to Afghanistan and gather all the gold. Where do we go and why do we go? To liberate people. Why? Because we believe that people deserve and need and merit being free. We hold these truths to be self-evident from our Creator.
I spoke to a woman in France. She was, I don't know, maybe 90 years old when I spoke to her, but their little town was right on the top of the hills at Normandy. She talked about remembering the day of the battle and what had happened. She talked about the Nazis that came in. And fascinatingly enough, she said the early Nazis weren't really that bad. But she said when the SS came in, they basically enslaved the people there. They put the men down to work on building the concrete
Wow.
boxes. They took over their families. They
Yeah.
took over their homes. And she said the thing that she remembered was that when the United States military came in, they won. They marched through their town. And she said there were a couple of things that was amazing. The first one she told me, I love this story. She said this young, handsome soldier who was American came up to her, and she was 8 or 9 years old, and he gave her a Hershey's chocolate bar. And she said, "Mayor," she said, "don't let those Swiss tell you they have the best chocolate." She says, "That Hershey's chocolate's still the best chocolate anywhere in the world," which I thought
That
was funny.
American piece. I love that. I love that.
But she said, then she said, I said, "Well, what surprised you the most?" She goes, "Oh, I can tell you what surprised us the most." She said, "The Americans came in, they beat the Nazis, they took over our town, and they gave it back.
And they gave
They
it
gave
back.
it back to us." So she went and rounded up soldiers that had
Incredible.
died in the battlefield and brought them out to that area right on those hills that they de-annexed to the United States. And those crosses
Hmm.
all look out
That
over the
sacred
Pacific,
land.
the Atlantic Ocean, looking back at us. This concept of civics that you were talking about, when we don't teach civics, when we decide not to be the superpower, the hegemon, as you had said a moment ago,
Yeah.
you're right. Someone else fills that position. And if you look at China, Russia, and Iran, the one thing that's clear is that all three of them want control over their sphere. China wants control over the Asian sphere.
Yep.
The Russia wants control over the European sphere,
The
and
Eastern
Iran
Bloc.
wants
Yep.
control over the Middle East sphere. And there's one big thing standing in the way: us.
Us.
That's it. If
And again,
we
and it's
lose
not
it, it's
because we want control over a sphere. It's because we want people to have autonomy and freedom in their own sphere.
to control their own markets, to control their own lives, and hopefully to empower the individual, as Western liberal democracies have. But the key is that we're losing this faith back at home, even this sense of who are we? Why do we do this? On the right and the left. We're watching it
Right.
on both sides.
Right.
The isolationists that
No.
are happening
So
on the far
true.
right.
So true.
And then when we don't teach civics, ideas like postmodernism and post-culturalism and post-colonialism, all those things begin to creep in to the educational doctrine, and all of a sudden people are saying, well, there are no universal values. It's just a matter of perspective, and it's only about the oppressed and the oppressor. And all of a sudden, not only do they not believe that we're not a force for good, they begin to think that maybe we're a force for bad, because they're
Right.
not being taught the other side. You don't have to discontinue the teaching of post-colonialism so long as there are history professors and others who can give the defense over who we are. Because when you look at the data, when you look at the facts, there's no disputing this. There's never been a greater force for good than the United States. That's just a fact, but it's not a truth if you don't educate people on it.
Right. And if people don't know it, if people, and again, that's where my urgency to impact this rising generation, whether it's my own children or their peers or, kids in a college class. I love American history. I love world history. And you know what? I even love the imperfections. And I'm okay with that. I heard a beautiful speech given that just reminded us of these, think of our founding fathers' words in the preamble of the Constitution. They say, "We the people, in order to form" what? "A more perfect union." They did not ever say "we the people" because we're perfect, or "we the people" because we figured everything out and we're better than everyone else. We've never said that. Patriotism was never meant to be supremacy or arrogance. But our founding fathers knew that there was a better way to do things than they had been done. And I think we can say without any hesitation, for the last 250 years about that we've been a country, we've continued to do things better. Are there things in our American history that you're like, man, I'm glad we don't do that anymore? I mean, slavery is a huge one of them, right? But that doesn't mean we have to rewrite history. We can say, isn't it beautiful that as our founding fathers passed the torch from one generation to another, we've continued to be a more perfect union, a more perfect people, more perfect children of God, working together, letting people exchange ideas, disagreeing. I love when we don't all have cookie cutter ideas. That's not going to ever get us forward. You speak of what America's done for the world. Think of the science and the innovation that has come from the ability to think freely, the ability to say there's got to be a better way to do that. And there is, not just in science, but in civics, in government, in our homes. And so I cling to those words in order to form a more perfect union. What are we doing today that helps America be more perfect tomorrow? I hope my children and my grandchildren are better than I am. I hope they have more understanding and a better grasp of the way of life and the purpose of life and the way to find meaning of life, which of course is not self-centered, but outward thinking. But you're right. If we don't teach it, if we either gloss over or blatantly rewrite history, we're only going to hurt ourselves, not just ourselves as Americans, but ourselves as the human race. Because we as Americans have been given so many opportunities and freedoms and blessings and privileges. What if that were a beautiful thing? What if the fact that we know what we know and we have what we have lets us then offer that to other people? And I say that all the time with my husband. Look at this. He died defending the Afghan way of life, a life that's very different from our own. He died defending a people I will never meet and a part of the planet I will likely never visit. Why? Because he believed that those truths were so self-evident that they mattered more than life itself. Like, where's that generation? We talk of the greatest generation in the World War II. Hold on a second, buddy.
Oh, he's
We
beautiful.
talk of the greatest generation.
Who just came on camera?
This is Jonathan. Come say hi, buddy. Jonathan just got home from school. We're almost done, bud. They just barely walked in the door. Say hi.
Hi, Jonathan.
When I'm done, you sure can.
Why do you need?
Because I just need a few more minutes. Hurry, step on out. Hurry. I'm sure you've got good editors.
No, we're not editing that out. That's a
oh, good.
beautiful
Leave that
thing
out.
right there.
Hi,
One
Jonathan.
of seven.
There's
Yep.
cute Jonathan. I can bring them all in one at a time if you want. And the dog's right at my feet. So if you want a real look at what widowhood looks like in America, let me show you. World War II. We call them the greatest generation. I think their greatness comes in their shared contribution to the preservation of freedom. Everyone pitched in. Whether you put the uniform on, hold on a second, buddy. What?
After this, can I use your phone?
Yes. Okay. Whether your contribution came because you put the uniform on, whether your contribution came because you couldn't buy nylons or butter because of war rations, whether your contribution came because somebody you love died in the service and you put a gold star in your window to let the neighborhood know. Everyone in that greatest generation felt the price of freedom. Everyone in that generation helped to pay it. We live in a generation where it's just not true anymore. Less than 1% of America right now serves in the military. And of those 1% that serve in the military, not all of them die for freedom and not all of them go to war and not all of them have the same level of, we're not asked to sacrifice as much as the World II generation was. I can go to the store and buy whatever I want. There's no war ration to say I can't have that ingredient because it's needed for the war effort. For too many of us in America, the price of freedom is so far removed that we're happy to let somebody else pay it. And it's just like we see in deficit spending in politics, right? If it's somebody else's money going to somebody else, just run up the charge. That's too common a mindset. When in reality, if more of us could remember and be educated about and really feel impacted by the price of freedom, we'd realize it's precious. And I think that as we stir those feelings of patriotism in the American people, we'll come to find a willingness, and I would dare say, even a desire to help pay for that. But right now, so many Americans are so far removed from what the price of freedom really is, that it's not even on their radar. And it's just like if you give the spoiled little child everything they've ever wanted, they probably don't appreciate it much, right? So that's one of my missions, one of my soapboxes is just trying to help people realize that the price of freedom is incredibly high and it needs to be paid. And there's no reason we should have less than 1% of the population pay the whole price. The price will be better paid when 100% of us pay it, each in our own way. I never went to boot camp. I never put on that uniform. That wasn't my path. I'm not saying you have to be in the military or die in battle to have paid the price. But when my husband died, someone said something that I think the phrase they used was, he gave his life for his country. We say that, right? He gave his life for his country. And I remember very early on thinking, when I die, and I don't know how old I'll be, I don't know how many years I'll have on this planet. When I die, Paul, I hope people will say of me, she gave her life for her country. I probably won't take a bullet to the head at the hand of an enemy the way my husband did. But I hope people know that I have given and want to give my life to my country. I want to give to the cause of human freedom and hope and opportunity. And I want to give it through raising children and educating young people and serving my neighbor and being a good person. Because for me, that's my contribution to the price of freedom. And if we would all pitch in a little and pay the price, for one, the price would be paid. But for two, we'd appreciate it more. It's hard to appreciate something someone else is footing the bill for. And I think that's a huge difference between our generation and the World War II generation. In World War II, everybody paid the price. Why? Because the war was just that impactful. In our world, it's just too easy to be too easy. And with that
Jennie,
comes the very dangerous slippery slope of not feeling the pinch, the price.
here's what I can say. There's a fusion of spirits that I see happening here between Brent and Jennie, the warrior and the history professor.
I'm going to write that down, a fusion of spirits. Okay, that's...
All right, Jennie, last thing, I want to make certain that I get from you the name of your foundation, and if people want to participate and take part, whether it's financially or through other means, how do they get through to you?
Oh, thank you, Paul. I'm so glad you asked. So our website is majorbrentaylor.com, and it literally is my husband's name. So Major was his rank, Brent Taylor, there's an N in Brent, majorbrentaylor.com. And then if you want to get involved, go check the website. It's got all kinds of information. You could also send us an email. And if you just email us at info@majorbrentaylor.com, that comes right to my inbox. So info, short for information. We'd love to let you know how to get involved in the cause, in the mission, no matter where you live. You don't have to be in North Ogden, Utah. We'd love to have you join this great mission. I love what you said, the fusion of spirits. My husband and I are still a team, and we're going to keep giving our lives to this country because it is worth giving our lives to.
There is a great gift the two of you can give this country, and it is a big mission. And it's the mission to help try and restore that sense of the American spirit, the ability to try and help restore that sense of mission.
Thank you.
And I don't think you can do that without being a warrior and having a deep sense of history. I'm so glad you're here, not just on our show, but on this planet. I'd like to thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'd also like to wish you and your family the very best. Godspeed to all of you. Bless every one of those 7 kids.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Keep at it. Keep at it. Thank you. We can do this. We use the phrase ignite patriotism on purpose. I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm not going to try to twist your arm. I believe that patriotism exists within us, and we just need to ignite it. And once we ignite it, watch out, because that American torch burns bright and hot and illuminates light for the world.
That's awesome. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Jennie.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a good one. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.